Voice of Yoga.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Choi, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on The Voice of Yoga, we will talk about divine revelation as the realization there is only one life and it is perfect everywhere, always. Lean in as we explain why Mary Baker Eddy suggests the allaying of the fear as the first course of action in divine science, because fear is the defense mechanism for the false sense of self. In this podcast, we will discuss the sequence and development found in the Transfiguration to the Resurrection of Lazarus in initiation. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and be a loyal servant of the Most High. Swami, I see the title of today's show is Living Between Two Worlds. Well, let's get started. What do we mean by that title?
Well, I think what we want to talk about here is this idea of trying to be physical, mental, and spiritual. However, trying to live in two worlds isn't possible because the mental material illusion isn't real. And the outer world of sense and the inner world of spirit become one when divine truth is the only consciousness. However, the physical body initially seems to have all the power of preservation and survival. And the physical body is like a monkey, and a monkey won't let go one branch unless it has another branch in the other hand. The idea of born of woman is what Mrs. Eddy would refer to as animal magnetism, which is instinct, appetite, preservation, survival. We don't just dismiss this, however. We must master the mind-body complex before we qualify as the next stage in development, which could be called born of man. If you try and take the things your body is using to validate itself away from the body, you will either become depressed and lose your effervescence for life, or the power of preservation and survival will overcome your personal willpower. The minute you take something away from the physical body, it responds as if it's in danger. It will do whatever it takes to get what it thinks it needs. So to do this with technique, substitute. The secret of substitution here is to substitute the necessary for the unnecessary. You want to internalize a completely different image that it will use to validate itself. The body comes in with a pattern. It looks for food, mother, and approval for validation. Now you want to purify the body of its dependency on things visible and tangible and invisible but tangible, matter and mind, thoughts and things. And then replace it with what is invisible and intangible. It's not that easy to do, simply because spirit is not visible and tangible to corporeal sense. So substitute breath for spirit. Air is invisible but tangible. You can hold your breath and put yourself in a real life-threatening situation, But for most of us, we don't have air in its position of importance in our value system. So we don't think it's valuable. And we continue to look for the other things internalized in the physical form. Once you've purged the body, and then through practice and repetition, you can internalize the new symbol for validation, which will make it much easier for you to separate your identity from being imprisoned in the physical form. Now you can rise into a larger sense of self, a better understanding. You can resolve the physical form into a mental image capable of receiving divine revelation.
Swami, how would we know if we are living in the outer world of sense or the inner world of spirit?
Well, mental material is dualistic. We have recollection from our experience with it because it is in half. The corporeal senses work on contrast, so anything that is visible and tangible, things, or anything invisible but tangible, thoughts, can be perceived with our corporeal sense mind. Once you begin to understand, spirit is invisible and intangible to corporeal sense because spirit works on the absolute. Spirit only perceives that which is whole and complete. And again, the mortal mind can't fathom infinity. So the command in the Bible was repent, which means think differently. We literally have to develop the faculty that enables us to perceive the divine creation. But it's a process. And the process parallels the hero's journey, the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a chrysalis to a butterfly. The hero's journey is the separation, the journey, the return. To initiate this process, we have to have the right symbol internalized in the mind-body complex. If we don't internalize spirit as your symbol for validation, you're in the wrong energy field. Matter and mind will continue to perpetuate the regressive cycle. You're in the cycle of death and rebirth. Matter and mind are not capable of bringing forth the divine image or attaining what we would call completion, wholeness. Spirit is the only self-existent power in the universe. So what we're really looking for is what is invisible and intangible to corporeal sense. Initially, we start with a belief in the divine creation. We believe God is everywhere, in all things, running a perfect universe. We also start to develop sensitivity and awareness for what is invisible and intangible through enlisting strategies like purification, purging your body of all your unnecessary dependencies, all of the things that produce cravings and disturbances in the mind-body complex, to increase your sensitivity and awareness for that which is invisible and intangible. Your belief in the divine creation will then graduate to faith, where belief in the divine principle begins to reveal itself in the testimony of your corporeal senses. You start to see the coincidence between the human and the divine. Spirit is a demonstrable principle, and divine science is a provable discipline, not just something we believe in.
So let's explain why Mary Baker Eddy suggests the allaying of the fear as the first course of action in divine science.
Well, like we said, fear is a defense mechanism for the false sense of self. If you are afraid, then of course your sense of self must be bound up in the form, in the false sense of existence. Whether we realize it or not, we're hypnotized. We believe we are vulnerable in a temporary sense of life. We believe in two powers. Once you grasp the idea that it is just a belief, it's not a something, and turn away from the testimony of the corporeal senses as your way of evaluating your sense of well-being, able to rest in a better perspective of yourself, in the divine truth of yourself. Divine truth in consciousness will resolve things into thoughts and exchange the objects of sense for the divine idea. Oftentimes it's difficult to believe sickness, suffering, disease, lack, limitation is not real. It's not the divine creation. But if you don't have this in your mental landscape, if you don't believe God is running a perfect universe, then of course you don't have a principle. You're living between two worlds. And so you've got to take a side. Jesus told us you can't serve two masters. The monkey that grabs one branch in one tree and one branch in the other tree goes nowhere. We have to make a decision, and you want to make the right decision. Choose the divine truth and not the mental material concept. And this is what oftentimes happens. We're doing it mentally. We're in the wrong self. Why in the Bible it says, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. When we do it with human will, personal sense, we're doing it with duality, which isn't real. It's not there. It's a concept. It's a belief, but it's not spiritual substance. Only the divine creation is real.
So, Swami, how did we get to this point where fear has become a part of our beings?
Well, we're socialized to trust in it because it keeps us imprisoned in the belief of mortality and duality. Fear runs the mental material world of energy. The false sense of self, without your belief in it, dissolves. Whether we understand this or not, it's a really interesting dynamic. I always think about the Hindu myth, God being one, the infinite supreme being, becomes all of creation, you, me, every event, circumstance, situation in the world, simply for its own amusement. This is cosmic TV, basically. And we can either be hypnotized and believe in all of the drama that's going on at this mental material level, or we can rise above it and know the truth. The only thing that's here is the divine creative principle functioning everywhere without the drama, without the belief in the opposites, without the temporary sense of life.
Swami, what does the Bible have to say about this false sense of self?
Well, for me, Scripture suggests we put off the old man, which is the most efficient way to allay the fear. However, no self and nothing to worry about isn't exactly what we're talking about here. We don't just want to manage fear. We want to know the truth, which means we have to not graduate to no self, but to oneself, the self, the one life, eternal life, perfect, whole, changeless, everywhere, always.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners will be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 2 is a unique and revolutionary practice and forum designed to facilitate the growth process in human development. Apotheosis is a real experience and has an evidence procedure. You cannot lead someone to permanent change by doing for them what they must do themselves. Personal accountability and responsibility are the foundation of Kriya Yoga Theory 2. You must be engaged and devoted. Prana power brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, purpose to overcome selfishness, enthusiasm to overcome laziness. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. These sessions are a celestial positioning system to guide the individual into union with the divine. For more information or to sign up for your next session online, go to www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those who are just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. Swami, you had mentioned earlier about the hero's journey, and I'm hoping that maybe you can give us a little bit more information about the journey, how it relates to today's topic.
Well, the hero's journey and born again of spirit are good metaphors for initiation of the process in development, because if we don't separate from the pattern of the physical body or animal magnetism and rejoin with the invisible, intangible, omnipresent spirit, there's no forward growth in consciousness. Matter and mind must join with spirit to initiate positive growth of consciousness. There's no other way. We must purify the mind-body complex of all the unnecessary dependencies and then install spirit as the new symbol for validation for the form. Change the reward circuits of the brain to spirit, which is invisible and intangible to corporeal sense. Then test the connection, the idea of leaving home. The hero's journey is great because it involves the separation, the journey, the return. It's caterpillar, chrysalis, butterfly, or even the Christian myth, the crucifixion of the body, the resurrection of the Son, the reunion with the Father. The developmental process is symbolized in a number of different ways. The most important thing is we must understand that we have to graduate from being instinctual, emotional, reactive, controlled by world mind, develop human intelligence, and then overcome world mind before we can walk reason through the open door of revelation.
So, let's talk about the prodigal son parable that's in the Bible, but let's talk about it from the perspective of the son who actually stayed home.
Yeah, the prodigal son, again, a great representation for the hero's journey, the separation, the journey, the return. And then, like you said, in the story, we also have the son who never left home, who is resentful for the other boy, who comes home and gets the robe and the ring. If we don't initiate our development, if we remain with what's safe, familiar, comfortable, and known, and continue to be born of woman or never separated from mother symbolically, there's the guilt, the shame, the anger, the resentment, the blame, the emptiness, and the boredom then infiltrates our inner environment. These are all of the problems most of us are struggling with today. We seek help in therapy, wondering why I'm so angry or why I can't control my behavior or my appearance. We are not initiating this process. All of the problems we experience and call karmic law is the love of God. It is the divine principle not letting us accept anything less than the perfection of being. We're in the wrong self, trying to figure out how the unreal became real. instead of putting our efforts in growing physiologically, psychologically, and spiritually, graduating from a mental material basis to a spiritual basis. Because there's no benefit in staying with the mental material concept. You live in chronic anxiety. You're governed by fear because it's going to go. The only thing that is real and permanent is spirit. And the benefit of being in a physical body is you have a pass card, a way of developing the faculty that will enable you to perceive the divine creation. Like Jesus said before he healed the blind man, "Now it is day, I must do the work of him that has sent me. Soon it will be night when no one can work." Spiritually speaking, nighttime is when we don't have the form, and day is when we do have the form. The form is like the monitor on a computer. You can use the testimony of your senses to test what it is you are conscious of. How are you thinking? There are 3 modes of mortal thought we have to master before we can walk reason through this open door of revelation. When we do, we should be able to demonstrate the omnipresence of the divine principle, because consciousness is experience.
So it sounds to me really the first step is for us to overcome this fear. And do you think it's because the reason why we have trouble with this is because we just have this fear of the unknown, and we're so conditioned in this mortal sense of self and this world that we're in, we can't imagine anything that could be better?
Well, to answer your question, it's all hypnosis. We're hypnotized. We have to be wakened from the dream state. And it's very important to understand how to do that successfully. Because I know a lot of people who think they are spiritually awakened, but their lives are in shambles. And the main reason is because we can't serve 2 masters. As Mary Baker Eddy wrote in Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, page 445, lines 15 to 18, and I'll read it. "You render the divine law of healing obscure and void when you weigh the human in the scale with the divine, or limit in any direction of thought the omnipresence and omnipotence of God." End of quote. Health and matter must be given up for health and spirit. You can't draw from fear and limitation and then expect to become truth and wholeness. And as long as we draw from particles and waves, matter and mind, we continue to perpetuate this regressive cycle. We're stuck in this hypnotic state, and we become frustrated because not only are we not demonstrating divine law with any kind of certainty, but we are also being bombarded by karmic law, getting this kickback from this unlived latent potential, demanding we separate from the false sense of self and accept ourselves to be the divine creative principle. Like Herb Fitch told us, we are to know we are Christ, not in the world, while appearing as form in the world. That's such a simple statement, but until you develop the faculty that enables you to perceive the divine creation, work with a belief. And if you're not employing the strategies, if you haven't purified the mind-body complex and rebirthed the body and spirit, then you haven't left home. And so your inner environment will be inundated with the guilt, the shame, the anger, the resentment, the blame, the emptiness, and the boredom. Here, we're not looking for relief. We want solution. And the only solution is to know the truth.
Swami, let's start With the two stories in the Bible, the Transfiguration and the Resurrection of Lazarus, can you start us off with the Transfiguration? What should we learn from that in relationship to today's topic?
Well, this idea of not living between two worlds, in order to initiate this developmental process, you look at the Bible, and if you notice, the Transfiguration is not in the book of John. It's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And the reason it's not in the book of John is because the book of John begins with the Transfiguration. All things were made by him, and what was not made by him was not made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. This gives you the starting point. So the Transfiguration is really how we resolve the physical form into a mental image that will be capable of receiving divine revelation. Then if you notice in the Bible, in the book of John, is the only place where the resurrection of Lazarus appears. It's not in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. And so the resurrection of Lazarus, it would be how we would exchange the objects of sense for the divine idea. It's a two-part process. First, we must resolve the physical body into a mental image capable of receiving divine revelation, and then we exchange the objects of sense for the divine idea. And so the symbolism of all of these stories in the Bible, when you unbox them, you can start to create the methodology in how to graduate from talking about divine science to demonstrating divine science with scientific certainty.
So, Swami, is there a how-to in either of those stories that maybe we should learn from that would help us progress spiritually?
Well, like I say, in the context of Kriya Yoga, you have a path of action, a path of knowledge, a path of devotion. We're employing strategies, skillful use of thought, skillful use of breath, skillful use of water, skillful use of exercise. We understand in our path of knowledge the relationship between thought and breath. And by controlling your rate of breathing, you can control your rate of thinking. Then when you enlist, say, for example, something like the Transfiguration, Jesus takes James, Peter, and John to the mountaintop where Moses and Elijah appear. We work with the symbolism found in Revelations, the man, the bull, the lion, and the eagle. An image that you draw with 7 personal planets, 12 signs of the zodiac, and then you can exchange the words that Mary Baker Eddy uses for God with the planets, say, for example, or the chakras in yoga, so that rather than using Jesus, James, John, Peter, you could use principle, soul, life, love, mind, truth, and spirit. And the joining of these levels of consciousness, because it's a process where we come out of time, out of space, out of concept and form, out of belief and matter, out of thinking and personal sense, human will. We stop thinking. And then you could also look at the symbolism of the resurrection of Lazarus in a very similar way.
So I thank you for your insights for today's topic, Living Between Two Worlds. Listeners, be sure to visit the website, www.ipdtransform.com. On any of the pages, as you scroll down, you'll see several buttons there that you could press to further your understanding. Swami, any final thoughts about today's episode?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance, get the light in your soul, and be a loyal servant of the Most High. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga realization. Namaste.